EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365 following a Mother's Day weekend. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Johnny Mac, good Monday to you, sir. How was your weekend?
Yeah, Mother's Day is always tough. I lost my mom a while ago, but that day always brings it back. So I hope everybody spent some time with their mothers or their wives and their children, because it's a great day. But it turns into a melancholy one at some point, unfortunately. So I hope everybody had a good weekend. And had a good Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day belated to all the mothers out there.
Condolences to you, Johnny Mac, on the loss of your mother. And that can be tough. I'm lucky enough to still have my mother. She's the greatest woman I've ever met. So I understand how you feel, and I am blessed to have my mother still around, and hope everybody did have a great Mother's Day. Johnny Mac, not a lot happening in Eagle land today. I did see the first news of the schedule release week. There's always little drips coming out right before the full schedule is released, but Ravens at Chiefs is going to start off the NFL season. Pretty good. That's a pretty good matchup to start the season on a Thursday night in Kansas City. So pretty good stuff there. Is that, by the way, is that the Thursday right before the Eagles will play in Brazil on Friday, or are they the following week?
Yes. No,
So
that is the
Friday
season opener, Thursday night, Ravens Chiefs. A lot of our NFL already has out sort of the NBA like manufacturing of hype with Lamar versus Patrick. They put that all over the place. So yeah, and then the Eagles will play on Friday, obviously in São Paulo, Brazil, which is that's going to be a story, especially if they lose it. It's a story because it's the first game ever in Brazil, but and it's the technically home opener for the Eagles, and they're playing Green Bay, who's the NFC side of the bracket and is supposed to be and should be a playoff contender. So, that game could have been, should have been, arguably. At Lincoln Financial Field, that would have been a bigger advantage for the Eagles as a home field, obviously, than São Paulo, Brazil. So it won't mean much if they win the game. So, winning controls everything and handles everything, and everything looks better after a win. But if they lose that game, Zander, I'm telling you,
I think it's a sleeper game, John. I really do. I think that Packers team has the ability to be really good on offense. I like Jordan Love. I knew we only saw 1 year of him, but I like LaFleur's system. I think it's a sleeper game. Eagles better show up ready to play.
Yeah, that's a good team, and Jordan Love is an emerging quarterback, and he looks like he's going to be very good for a long time. But yeah, I mean, there's only 17 of these things. And, Vic Fangio, by the way, described this well, because Vic's a big baseball fan, big Phillies fan. That's been a big story. And the Phillies are off to such a great start. But, and he said when they played 16 for so many years, he's like, think about it from a baseball perspective. They play 162, right? So if you lose 2 games in a row in the NFL, that means you lost 20 in a row in baseball. That's sort of how big each game is. And then you bring it to the fact that you're against an NFC foe that you're probably going to be fighting for playoff seeding, and it becomes a bigger game, whether it's week 1 or week 17, week 10, wherever. There's only 17 of these things. So it's going to be a big thing. And that's why I advocated, Jody and I used to go back and forth, and he got that one right. He said the NFL would lean on wanting the sexier foe, and that's obviously Green Bay.
Yeah, there was some talk about them playing the Browns.
I said it would be Cleveland, because I didn't think Jeffrey Lurie would want to lose a big home game like that. I thought he'd fight a little bit harder. And I think we were talking to Les Bowen, who's been around Jeffrey Lurie for a very long time. He's made a dramatic shift. When they first started these international games, the Eagles wanted no part of it. at times, and he's changed over the last number of years where he's embraced it and he understands how big it is for the league.
Yeah, and the money. The money.
Yeah, and the money's obviously at the root of everything. But yeah, he softened his stance, and he knows it probably would have been better from the football side to play Cleveland out in Brazil. But he's willing to take that hit for the good of the league, and that's been one of the changes of Jeffrey Lurie over the years.
Speaking of the Cleveland Browns, boy, what a bullet the Eagles dodged. Everybody was talking about going and getting Deshaun Watson. That has certainly not lived up to the hype in Cleveland.
Yeah, well,
story.
Very talented guy. Yeah, and there's still people that hold on to that. They weren't interested. They were very interested in Deshaun Watson, and they weren't the only ones. I mean, this guy got the first completely fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, except for rookies, obviously. And from the standpoint of just the number, and remember, Cleveland had to go to that degree because he was all set to sign with Atlanta. It's interesting because he and Jalen Hurts are friends, and a lot of it came down to he didn't want to take an opportunity away from his friends.
Right.
And he had so many other options. If it came down to it was Eagles or bust, obviously, he would have chosen the Eagles, and but he didn't even consider them essentially because he didn't want to take that opportunity away. So I think that's one thing you should be at much lesser level, but for those Isaiah Rodgers truthers, a year off can hurt you. And it was a year plus for Deshaun Watson.
Right.
But he's not the same guy. But before all his legal issues, he was a star quarterback, and he hasn't been since he came back.
Yeah, good funny story about that Watson contract. I remember we were talking about it all offseason. JAKIB Sports was producing the Maxwell Awards that year down at Harrah's Casino in Atlantic City. I had just been in the room talking to Jordan Davis before he was an Eagle. He was winning the Chuck Bednarik Award that year. And I remember hearing the news come down and saying, he got what? Fully guaranteed. So that was a pretty good story. From the Maxwell Awards. I remember that the day that contract broke and we were all waiting for it to happen, but pretty good stuff. Johnny Mack, let's move into some Eagles news. OTAs 1 week away, and then there were some rumors of a joint practice with the Patriots. We'll get into that. What are you looking forward to as we prepare? We're obviously still a week away, but OTAs, what can we expect? Is that still an acclimation period where they're, getting
pretty much.
Yeah.
The bigger part is going to be the mandatory mini camp, which we'll be able to figure out some of the depth chart things and where they're going to start and build from. Generally the Eagles have been of the school that you make the young players earn it. So it'll be interesting to see if Quinyon Mitchell lines up as a first team corner. I doubt it, as long as James Bradbury is here, but I think long term, where that's going. Cooper DeJean is going to be I'm going back and forth. DeJean,
his name
not
has
DeJean
changed
because of Philadelphia. Everybody wants to call him DeJean, but it is DeJean where he's going to line up, and they've already indicated that they started him at outside corner. But he's playing a secondary position as well. Vic noted that because of his versatility. So, I think third receiver, it'll be Paris Campbell to start, for instance, things like that. Right guard, it'll be Tyler Steen to start, but I think there'll be a legitimate competition throughout the spring and summer. Those mini camps, that's going to be big because the entire practice is going to be open, all three, to reporters. And we haven't had that since the pre-COVID era with Doug Peterson. So it's been a long time since we've been able to get that. And you don't get that intelligence. You don't know. You don't get where they're going to start because the OTAs, they only have to, there's a cluster of 3. They only have to open one of them. You only get to watch individual drills and some stretching and practice. So you get to talk to some players, but there's not a lot of on-field information you can ascertain from those things. Minicamp is different, and that'll be early June, and that'll be very, very important to sort of figure out where the Eagles are starting and where do they want to end up.
So mini camp in June is when you guys are going to have 3 full days to be able to consume all of practice. So we'll have a lot to talk about on Birds 365, and that's good insight because we'll be able to go into training camp and into the season with at least you guys, you reporters, the Eagles beat reporters, having a better understanding of what the Eagles are going to do. I guess they've gotten over the competitive advantage talking point around not letting you guys in there. Is that what it is? What's going on with that?
No, I think, well, Nick's always big with competitive advantage, but I've always said that the Eagles scale back in off-season work. It started, for people that don't know, when Nick first got here, it was still the COVID era, so to speak, the very end of it. And that prior, they hadn't been doing off-season work because of all the protocols and all that types of stuff. So they were starting to loosening the strings on some of the restrictions. And Nick scheduled a mini camp originally, but there was some back and forth that a lot of the veterans didn't want to show up, still concerned about COVID, all that craziness. By the way, if we look back at that, we're all such goofballs toward
I
that.
know we
It's
are.
embarrassing. But that we could do a 15-hour show on that.
Yeah.
So basically he negotiated with some of the veteran players, and to get them to come into the voluntary work, he agreed to scrap mandatory minicamp. And that's what happened, and that's why it went away. And then they weren't supposed to make a run to the playoffs, but they made a run to the playoffs. So the Eagles were, from the perspective, all right, we stayed pretty healthy as well overall. This is working. Let's stick with it. Then they went to the Super Bowl. Obviously, they weren't changing there,
Right.
especially after a long season and coming back. And last year they disappointed at the end of the season. So now there's that opportunity for change. Plus, you have Vic Fangio, old school guy's going to come in, and
Yeah,
he
that was an
wants to
interesting
practice.
answer that he had at his press conference. I'll let Nick answer that when he was asked if he
Yeah.
pushed for, yeah.
Well, he knows. It's
Yeah.
not his place. He's been a head coach and he's been a defensive coordinator. So he understands he has to leave certain things to the head coach. But
I think
yeah,
he also understands that they need reps. I mean, he needs
I mean,
reps.
he
Yeah.
also made it very clear that, but so does Nick. I think people think, Nick, that was an organizational decision.
Right. It wasn't
You
all on Nick
No,
Sirianni. It was Howie. It was Jeffrey. It was the
yeah.
whole organization thinking that that was the best way.
I have said to this day, I've never met a football coach that hasn't wanted to practice more, and Nick is in that camp. So for people that blame Nick for that, you're going down the wrong path. There's never been a football coach that doesn't want to practice. Never. I don't think there ever will be.
Yeah, Nick does come off though as kind of that player's coach, which is where I'm sure he wants to practice more, but maybe he values more of the player feedback on, than he does what he wants to do, which I could see. Johnny Mac, rumors of the Eagles doing a joint practice. Obviously, this would be way later in the offseason training camp in August, during the time of the preseason. But anything to take away from that? I think that they talked about only doing one day to avoid any scuffles that might happen on day 2, as they usually do. I know the Eagles had a couple of them in the last couple of years, but not a bad team. I think might be good to go up to New England and practice with them in Foxborough.
Yeah, I mean they have a long history too of
Yeah.
preseason practices with the Patriots, because most of the preseason schedule is based on proximity, to be honest. So they play the Patriots quite a bit. And Bill has brought them in here numerous times. Eagles have done it there. Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all. The one joint practice I don't necessarily like. You get a better feel if there's 2 days, but they did that with Indianapolis last year. They had some fights anyway at the end and had to call off the end of practice because Jason Kelsey did a beeline and basically speared Zaire Franklin, Philly native. So that was entertaining, but a lot of trash talking between Shane Steichen's team. Yeah, just, guys get tired of practicing against each other. It always brings a little bit of juice to training camp when you see another jersey. So it's always a fun day, fun couple of days when it happens. Eagles have done it with the Ravens a lot. They do it with the Jets. Again, it tends to be based on proximity. But it's always,
and I think they put more value on it now that the preseason games are.
Yeah,
they don't matter at all. I mean, I guess for the back of the roster they do, but they don't matter for the people that are, playing all the snaps in the game.
And those weeks, Nick has made it very clear that the starters, they get their work in practice, and it's usually the back end of the roster guys that play in the game, which hurts to go into the game. But in a lot of ways, it makes sense because if you want to work on something, you could script it in practice. So, say the Eagles are struggling in red zone, they could set up a red zone period, whether it's offensively, defensively. Whereas if you're trying to work on that during an actual preseason game, you got to hope it happens. You got to hope you get into the red zone to be able to work on it. So you can't script it. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense. You could script what you want to work on. And Nick Sirianni, obviously, the Patriots will have a rookie head coach for the first time in a very long time. So Nick might even be able to take advantage of him, get more scripted periods for him.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I want to thank everybody in the chat for checking in. SMD Eagles, Crawley, Daz, Dank, C24, Bobby. We appreciate everybody for checking in on this Monday. A reminder, May 15th, so Wednesday of this week, the full schedule will be released. So we'll start to do the win and loss predictions and look at the Eagles schedule. I think it actually does. I know everybody jokes about doing the win and loss thing, but from a perspective of seeing who the Eagles are going to play and when they're going to play them, I think it matters because you look at last season, they had that gauntlet of games. Obviously, it didn't go well for the Eagles. So I do think from that perspective, the way a schedule is set up can either hinder you or help you as a team. Coming up in hour 1, so coming up soon, we'll have Jeff Kerr. And then Johnny Mack later in the show. Johnny Mack and I will talk about Vic Fangio's fronts, his versatility on defense, him not running a 3-4 defense, and what it will look like with all the linebackers and everything. So I'll give Johnny Mack a chance to really dive into that and break some of that down. But make sure you guys like the show. Let's get up over 100 likes on the show today. We're going to take our first commercial break right now, and on the other side, we'll be joined by Jeff Kerr. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Stay locked in here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you.
Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.
Heading down the shore. Have a ball once more.
Here, imaginations run wild and time stands still. Because here, you can find the best of the Jersey Shore, all on one 5-mile island. So leave the old you behind and get lost in the woods.
Wild, wild, wildwood days.
Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!
The greatest fans on earth. It's a bold statement, but would you expect anything less from Philadelphia? 58 years of heartache creates a toughness, a grit, a resolve not found in most. Sure, our prayers were answered, but now that we've had a taste, we're looking for more. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365, a schedule release week edition of Birds 365. Joined now by our good friend Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports. Jeff, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this week?
Hey, pretty good. It might be a surprise for you guys what the schedule is. It won't be for me. Just so you know.
Did you get the whole schedule so
Yeah,
far?
I have it. Yeah, I can't say anything, but John, we're not going to be too happy.
You mean if you're talking from a logistic standpoint, yeah, I don't care about the actual. Yeah, I'm not going to be happy or sad by the opponents and the timing, but if it's logistical related, yeah, that I might have an issue.
Work related too, John.
Well, that's yeah, a lot of night games. I know that going in. But from the perspective of the NFL schedule, I think it starts week one. One of the bigger issue for the Eagles is that we know they're starting against Green Bay and Sao Paulo, Brazil, and that game should be at Lincoln Financial Field against a legitimate NFC playoff contender, Jeff. I think that's a bad spot for the Eagles. They better win that game. Because if they don't win that game, it's going to come back to haunt them in playoff seeding. I guarantee it.
It is. And that was one thing I had like when they picked Green Bay as the opponent. And look, Green Bay just played. I didn't think it was going to be Green Bay initially because they just played an international game 2 years ago when they played the Giants in London. So I figured, okay, the Browns haven't played overseas in a while. Well, not even overseas, outside the country in a while. Pittsburgh, I didn't think it was going to be Pittsburgh. I thought they wanted to keep that in-state battle in-state. So all signs pointed to it being the Browns, but
well, that's what I picked. Yeah, I was like, because in the past, Jeffrey Lurie is, he's tried to stay away from international games and to give up a big home game like that against Green Bay. Not that Cleveland's not a good team because they're a good team, but in this league, if you're going to lose a game, it's better to lose it out of conference than it is in conference. Always.
One good thing about this whole Eagles they gave up a home game to play this game in Brazil. They don't have to do this for another 8 years. So it is a shame, though, it happened to be Green Bay on the first week of the year on a neutral field. I don't know. It just feels like I'm watching college football to open the season instead of the NFL.
Yeah, I don't like it. Yeah, I'm with you.
We got one game we know so far before. Well, Jeff Kerr knows all of them as
unfortunately,
yes. That's a broadcast partner. That's what the broadcast partners get as they fight for. The schedule was originally set to be released last week, Jeff, but they got to wrangle now. Netflix is probably going to get. You probably already know they're going to get those Christmas Day games,
which frustrates me. personally, because I'm big into the whole TV contract thing. There is a network, not CBS, that has a right at those Christmas Day games if the NFL chooses it. And the NFL just, I don't know if they bypassed it. I don't know if that network declined to broadcast those games on the Wednesday. I don't know why they would, but
The NFL probably gave them the big FU and said, "Hey, guess what? Netflix is going to pay us $50 million dollars for
by the way,
one
the whole
game."
Netflix thing is going to be intriguing because I don't even think it's going to be like a Netflix production. I think it's going to be an NFL Network production.
Probably that's the way they generally start those things. Yeah, the NFL. It's interesting because like Netflix got WWE away from NBC Universal for $5 billion. But they do their own production, WWE. So it is going to be interesting. Usually the networks do the production, like CBS does the production of their particular game. So it is going to be interesting how that shakes out, but only for nerds like you and me. But it is an interesting part of it. The NFL can do what it wants when it comes to TV. Everybody else is leaking oil except the NFL. So, but at the same time, the schedule has become more difficult because they have so many partners. And you guys at CBS are fighting for certain games and don't want to lose certain games. And every other network partner is saying, well, you got to give us something. You got to give us some of these good games. So it is difficult to put together.
Yeah, I know just from being a CBS employee, I mean, again, you knew it was going to be the Ravens and Chiefs for the opener, but that's still a big loss for us because that's one of our marquee games. But you got to please NBC, you got to please ESPN, you got to Amazon. It's Amazon was never going to get that game, but it was primed to be the kickoff game. And it was like last year. I think Fox would have initially had the rights to Eagles Chiefs, but ESPN wanted that for Monday Night Football. And with this whole new TV contract, teams are going to play more primetime games. It's not just the Eagles; it's everybody. The 1 and 4 o'clock games are kind of going by the wayside.
Oh, it's the worst thing ever.
Yeah, they're
Worst
really
thing ever.
Especially the Eagles. I mean, they're going to have more primetime games than everybody's thinking. I mean, they got this
They're going to have a lot
offense. But look, we only know one game in the Eagles' schedule. I'm not going to make my official prediction yet, but I do not like that setup for the Eagles in Brazil to start the season versus the Packers. I think the Packers are a little bit slept on, maybe even a little bit underrated. A lot of pressure on the Eagles with the new coordinators, with Saquon Barkley, with the big offseason. Eagles could start 0-1 in Brazil. That is not out of the equation.
It definitely is. And then, they're going to get a nice little layoff after that game. I'll just say that. But
yeah, you don't need a layoff after the opener. Well, you do if you're traveling to Brazil. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I don't like the spot for the Eagles. That's what I look at when I do get the schedule, and I'll be texting you for the schedule as soon as we get off here. When I do get the schedule, all I look at is the spots. Like a couple years ago, the Eagles had 3 consecutive road games, and number 3 was on Christmas Eve in Dallas. And I said, that's a bad spot. That is a bad, bad, bad spot. Turned out to be right. So I think there's certain things you can learn from the schedule, but most of it is, all right, who's healthy on this particular week? And, are you playing well? Are you not playing well? So most of it is just logistics and dates and times, but it can be there. You'll find 2 or 3 nuggets that are meaningful. And I think this year starts week 1. I don't want to call it a must-win game. It's not must-win. But if they lose that game, it's going to hurt them in the playoff seeding down the road.
I get this a lot from a lot of people. Who cares about the schedule release? I'm like, well, shouldn't you as a fan care if you're planning on seeing this team home or on the road?
Well, like I've always said I'm more in the category like I'm not a big schedule release guy. I think it's overblown. As I said, it's times and dates, but for people that do travel, for people like us who have to cover games, fans who want to travel to games, it's meaningful because you want those logistics and you want to be able to set up your travel and things like that. But to the average fan that's sitting in front of home and the television set, yeah, I don't think it matters. I think it's overblown. You already know who they're playing. You just don't know the dates and times. You know every opponent. You just don't know the dates and times. So, but credit to the NFL for turning this into an event, as they turn everything into an event.
I do miss the days though where it just dropped on a random Tuesday in April. It was like
Mid-April, yeah.
Yeah, I miss those days. I remember you kind of got excited for it. I remember like being in classes at college, and it's like, oh, the Eagles schedule's out. The NFL schedule's out. I'm like, oh, cool. And I always
the most riveting 10 minutes of radio would be Mike Francesa saying, "That's a win. That's a loss. That's a win."
By the way,
riveting radio.
By the way, John, as someone who covers the entire league, I am going to dread Christmas week like no other. I was mad last year on Christmas. I'm going to be furiously.
You know who should be mad about Christmas? The NBA. That used to be
the
their
NBA
day.
got completely robbed of Christmas Day. The NFL said, "Yeah,
that used to be their day
now."
And last year, the NFL said, "Oh, Christmas is on a Wednesday. We're not going to play games on a Wednesday."
And then they changed it the owners' meeting.
Yeah. No, we're going to play because Netflix is going to pay us, so we're going to play.
NFL always finds ways to make money, no matter what they do.
Yeah. So sorry, NBA. Enjoy your playoff run because you're going to get screwed on Christmas.
Shout out to SMD. She points out.
I agree with SMD too. I really do.
It is a big deal for people that are loyal to going to the games, and for us, it's important because we're figuring out what days we're working all damn day for 18 to 20 hours. So that's why it's important. But Jeff, we're getting ready for OTAs. Anything catching your eye on the Eagles coming up into OTAs? A lot of people are talking about some of the key position battles. What is Jeff Kerr looking for as we go into OTAs?
Who's playing linebacker? I mean, I have an idea who's playing linebacker.
Zach Bond.
Yeah,
the Vic Fangio.
That probably is. Do you believe him? Do you think it's going to be Zach Bond?
No, I don't. Vic's great, by the way, but he got asked about the linebackers, and he couldn't come up with the names. He was going to his back pocket to pick out the roster, and we're like feeding him names. It's not a good situation at linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles. I got to believe Howie knows that. He knew it last year, but it's, part of the strategy. They don't value that position. So, the first two names he brought up were Zach Bond, who we all thought was going to play outside.
And
he says he can play inside. And Devin White, who signed for $3.5 million, despite what you've heard elsewhere or when his contract broke. That ain't good. That ain't good. And the Kobe Dean, we'd know. First of all, he has to prove he's healthy from the foot injuries. He's had trouble finding footwear that he's comfortable with. A lot of issues there. He's undersized. And oh, by the way, when he was on the field, he didn't look that impressive. And then you start talking about Jeremiah Trotter Jr. as a 5th round pick might be generating the most optimism. That is not a place you want to be at a particular position when, I don't want to say you're counting on a 5th round pick, but he's the guy with the upside and the optimism right now.
To me, it's borderline malpractice what they've done at that position. It's, they're trying to get everybody hyped up. Oh, we signed Devin White. Well, Devin White ain't any good. So maybe he could be good in Philadelphia, but again, I'm not counting my chickens on that one. I was very upset with how they've handled this the whole offseason. And now you're putting pressure on a kid, a 5th round pick, mind you, who, if his name was John McMullen, no one would give a rat's ass about him. But
That's how they'd enjoy it.
yeah, probably would. But his name's Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and we know what his dad did. His dad didn't play right away. In fact, his dad is second. Emmett Thomas used to rip his dad to shreds back in the day. So look, it took Jeremiah Trotter about 2 or 3 years before he actually became Jeremiah Trotter, and I just don't want to see his kid getting thrown into the fire because they don't have anybody there. And there really isn't anybody in free agency right now that moves the needle. The best linebacker available was on this team last year, and that was Zach Cunningham.
Yeah, I think they're going to bring Zach back. And Jeff, to your point, I mean, he's already got sky high pressure and expectations because of who his father is. And then year one, you have nobody on the roster. It's going to make it a whole lot tougher. But I'll ask both of you this, and forgive my ignorance. Is there anybody out there that Howie could make a move for still in the offseason? And obviously we don't know anybody that could be traded, but normally, like, okay, this guy's going into the last year of his deal. They're probably not going to pay him. Maybe they look to move him. Is there any linebackers out there that the Eagles could be targeting or available in the trade market potentially?
That is something. If you think about the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade, that's what you're looking at. You're trying to find somebody who's on his rookie deal, who is out of sorts with their particular coaching staff, but you think might have some upside. So that's the kind of stuff that generally unfolds over the summer. Maybe they have a bad camp and the Eagles still believe they have an upside. Maybe they're having contract issues like CJ was, and they can take advantage of some of the anger there and make a deal from that perspective. But I think that would be the best case scenario. I can't come up with a name for you right now because most people before training camp, they don't have these types of issues. If somebody with some talent gets beaten out somewhere else that actually values linebackers and has extra bodies, then maybe you try to seize the moment with that particular player. But that's just something that has to, kind of ease its way in training camp. Somebody's got to be playing poorly, falling behind, and you say, well, we could rescue him. We can give him a chance to play. And I think there'll be multiple players because the Eagles are so weak at the position.
Yeah.
The question is to you, Jeff, I think they're talking themselves into Devin White.
I think they are too. And that's what's scary. It's, I get it. He was a former first-round pick. He had a tremendous postseason when the Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. That was 4 years ago. It was
one of the biggest anomalies ever.
Yeah. And by the way, when you're hearing stuff coming out of Tampa that he checked out, he might have, he's immature. And this is from players. This isn't from, reporters. This is scary stuff. And you hope to change the scenery helps this guy, but you're putting an awful lot of pressure on the guy who's trying to resurrect his career because you think he's this when he's that. I just don't understand why it was just Devin White.
Man, it's like, how he did this. It was Saquon, number 2 overall, Devin White, number 5 overall. Kenny Pickett, former first-round pick that they liked, but obviously weren't going to take a quarterback coming out of the draft. Who else? What other first-round picks did they sign this year? But anyway, a lot of people made Mekhi Becton.
Mekhi Becton,
Becton, right.
A lot of people made a big deal out of that. The Eagles trying to resuscitate their careers and what a great value it is. What a great strategy it is. Boy, people forget they did the same damn thing last year with Marcus Mariota and Terrell Edmonds and Rashad Penny, who everyone thought was Jim Brown coming in and still thought he was Jim Brown by midway through the season. Why aren't the Eagles playing Rashad Penny?
I said it. I watched Rashad Penny play, and in training camp, it was, wow, this guy really isn't going to play. And I know Rashad Penny wasn't too happy.
And even if you want to go as far as Justin Evans and Greedy Williams,
Right. Those
were
were former
second round
high picks. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
high picks.
Yeah, by the way, that's one thing I want to tell people with the whole Isaiah Rodgers thing. I know people got excited about that. Well, people were excited about Greedy Williams when they signed him too, and they didn't even make the team. I'm not saying Isaiah Rodgers is going to make the team, but buyer beware here. It's especially now there's a surplus at cornerback. It's people are saying Josh Jobe ain't going to make this roster. Are we sure about that? He's a really good special teamer.
He's a very good fit. It's very difficult. Here's guaranteed corners on the roster. There's only 4. And I'm talking 100% ironclad guarantee. Barring injury, of course, which can affect anybody. But if they're healthy, it's going to be Slay, Mitchell, DeJean, and Ringo. Those are the 4 guaranteed.
I would agree with that.
100%. Everybody else, including Isaiah Rodgers, Josh Jobe, Eli Ricks, they're fighting for jobs.
Is there any roster out there? Like, John, we talked about this last week. There are teams probably looking at the Eagles, watching how the training camp goes and waiting for them to make cuts because there are NFL caliber corners on our roster that there's just no room for. Are there any teams out there?
I agree. They're going to cut. They're going to cut. They're going to cut corners that are NFL level corners. But I thought you were going down the route of trading. And yes, I'm sure there are teams. I'll do some research. I'm sure there are teams that are deep at linebacker. Normally, the ones you think of. Baltimore let Patrick Queen go. They always have linebackers. Pittsburgh picked them up. They always have linebackers.
They got Peyton Wilson, so they always
they got Peyton Wilson. They always have linebackers. So there's certain teams
have good linebackers.
They lost Oren Burks to the Eagles, but they have good starting linebackers. I don't know.
By the way, John, that's my bold prediction. Oren Burks might be their best linebacker.
It's not that bold.
I mean, we just ignored him for like 15 minutes of their organizational malpractice at the position.
But I would say about the Eagles corners, and it looks a heck of a lot better than it did now than it did last year. But 90% of it is unproven, completely unproven. As a corner, I mean, let's be honest, Ringo and Ricks, and even if you want to go as deep as Jobe and Mekhi Gardner is probably going to move to safety anyway.
I think he can be a good safety in this league. I really do. It's just they're deep there too, especially if they move DeJean out there a couple times.
Yeah, I mean they're all unproven. And guys like Zach McPherson, he's probably not going to make the team. Isaiah Rodgers, I mean, for all the people that thought he was, going to be a starter and now don't care because Quignon's here and Cooper's here. He could be cut if he has a bad summer. We were talking about Deshaun Watson. I don't know why, but we were talking about Deshaun Watson. You spend a year off the field, there's no guarantee.
He hasn't been the same player. Look at Calvin Ridley. Jacksonville was more than okay with saying we are not matching that offer to Tennessee. We're just not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big hit, even for young guys, if you lose a full season. So the assumption that Isaiah Rodgers is just going to come in and make this team, no, he's going to play well in the summer. And he's going to be in a deep competition because the Eagles already know Ringo and Ricks and those guys.
Yeah, and is it fair to say they'll put an emphasis or a they like the guys they have in-house more than somebody like Isaiah Rodgers, who they brought in as a reclamation project?
Well, I do think people jump the gun on some of the young corners, but
I mean, Akili Ringo, though. I mean, they gave spent a 4th-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, Keely's not going. Keely's not going anywhere. But I'll tell you right now, here's Keely's problem. He stunk in practice. I mean,
he's not a practice player.
He stunk in training camp. I mean, stunk on ice to the point where.
Hey, those are the words you used when you and I were watching practice last year.
I mean, to the point Eli Ricks passed him up as an undrafted guy, and then they were forced to play him late in the season, and he looked really good. So you start thinking to yourself, well, maybe he's what Jeff said. Maybe he's just a game day player. He's not a practice player. That's not going to float with Vic Fangio. Vic's not going to trust him unless he performs in practice.
Vic's, I'll put it as nice as I can. Vic's a hard ass.
Yeah, it's not going to work. So I have some concern. He better figure out he's got to bring what he does to the games to practice. And if he does that, he'll be fine. And I think he'll be really good.
John,
but if he doesn't, he's going to have a real difficult time breaking through.
John, I wanted to ask you, you going up to New England with me?
For practice?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go up for practice. Practice is meaningful.
You know what? That joint practice, if it's, I'm hearing it's going to be one. That's going to be entertaining because Jerome Mayo and Vic Fangio, they're just like two. I can't even think of the analogy right now, but that's going to be something. Just watching those two.
Yeah, they're always fun. They were. Yeah, think about last year with Kelsey taking aim at Zaire Franklin. That was entertaining.
That was an entertaining practice in general.
Yeah. Colts got the better of the Eagles in that practice.
We
all thought the Colts were bad. Maybe that showed they were better than most people thought.
You know, I made my judgment on the Browns being a playoff team after watching them play the Eagles in a joint practice.
I made my prediction that Myles Garrett will be the defensive player of the year because they could not even attempt to block him. I mean, it was one of the most impressive. It's interesting. The most impressive practice performance I've ever seen is Tom Brady against the Eagles in joint practices, which was one of the funnest things ever.
What
year was that, John? Yeah.
That's going back when Belichick when Chip was here.
So I believe 13-14, right?
Yeah. I believe it was that Brandon Boykin was here. I remember Brandon. All I remember is Brandon going, they were doing individual drills on the far right field. So Jeff knows what I'm talking about. So you get right up there. And I was watching the Patriots receivers against the Eagles corners. Every single Eagles corner walking back, expletive. Effing this. Every ball was perfect. The ball placement, it was unbelievable. And I remember Brandon Boykin for some reason heading back. I believe. So it's been a while. Then there was Darren Waller was a rookie wide receiver, 6th-round pick out of Georgia Tech with the Ravens that nobody knew who the hell he was. And he just destroyed the Eagles in red zone. Big 6'6" guy just going up and catching balls. And we're like, who the hell is this guy? And he turned into Darren Waller. And man, I lost the train. Who were we talking about? There's a third one. But yeah, joint practices are fun. And it really, especially in training camp, because guys get bored going against each other. But when you see guys like Tom Brady do that, it was amazing. It was amazing. Ask guys who were down there. It was amazing.
I'll tell you what, seeing the Ravens in joint practices, not against the Eagles, but seeing them in joint practices, honestly, that's what makes the summer fun. You get through those first 2 or 3 weeks, you're like, okay, let's play some real football here. You're not going to get in the preseason. You get in the joint practice. It's honestly a shame the fans don't get to see this stuff up.
Oh, and Miles was the one I was talking about. Miles Garrett.
Yeah, Miles Garrett.
Right, yeah.
Miles Garrett was and also Justin Tucker. I've never enjoyed watching someone kick a football until I saw Justin Tucker. I just stood there in awe.
You know, John, the most entertaining pregame practice, anything this whole year was the AFC Championship game. I'm getting there, I'm eating my food, I'm sitting in my seat, and we're watching Justin Tucker just kick warm-ups because I'm amazed at Justin Tucker. And then all of a sudden, Travis Kelce gets in his face about something. I'm like, oh, here we go. And then
that went viral everywhere, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. I had to ask Travis after the game, and he said, can we keep this off the record?
I think that was.
I said, we can.
That was actually Justin's fault. Justin
It was Justin's fault.
yeah,
And the and the Ravens PR is like trying, he does that all the time. I'm like,
Yeah.
they don't care, guys. They don't care.
A little mind games maybe from Justin Tucker.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't mine. It wasn't.
I like it. I like it.
Completely. Yeah.
But
the ball coming off his foot, Jeff, it's like a shotgun blast. It's unbelievable.
How about the 61-yard kick he kicked in the preseason against the Eagles last year?
Yeah. He is something else. Carly Lloyd was there that day too. She was banging through 50-yarders with Justin Tucker after practice. And now she would get a head start, like a kickoff type approach, but it was still pretty impressive.
That was when all the hype was, can Carly Lloyd kick in the NFL with Carly?
Yeah. That was what that was from. Now, again, she was, approaching it like a kickoff, so she was getting the head start, but it was still pretty impressive. And Justin, he's just like, oof. I've never seen anything like it. We had his kicking coach, Randy Brown, on the show a couple of years ago. It's like he made Randy's career. He's like the kicking guru because of Justin Tucker. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. But Myles Garrett last year, defensive player of the year. I said it at practice. Jeff was probably there. I mean, that guy's.
I think it was you. I think it was you, me, and Ed when you said that.
Yeah. So I got that one right. But that's because how good he was. And remember, he's going against Jordan Mailata, who's pretty good. Couldn't block him. Yeah.
I want to ask you guys, everybody's been talking about the corners and the linebackers all offseason. What's the rotation look like on the defensive line? Obviously, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis are set for bigger roles this year. With Fletcher Cox gone, you lose Hassan Reddick and you replace him with Bryce Huff. What's the rotation look like on that D line, and do they have enough depth there at that position?
I think they're honestly okay at that.
I like Milton Williams. I think Milton Williams is a good player.
I do too. I'm glad you pointed that out, Zander, because I'm a lot higher on Milton Williams. And it's funny because I always forget about Milton Williams at times, but
I actually thought there was at times last year when he played better than the two Georgia guys. I thought he was a great.
At the end of the season, he did, and they're going to make a decision on him going forward. But we're talking about the edge, and look, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, weren't okay with that. It's gonna be a redshirt year for Jalen Hunt, so I don't want to really add him into the mix there. But I'll bring back my Hassan Reddick thing. I understand why they did get rid of him. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. I think you hurt some depth there, but look, and again, John, this brings back our whole Zach Bond thing. Where are they playing him at?
What about
because I thought he was an edge rusher.
What about Nolan Smith? He's like the forgotten child.
Nolan's got to step up in a big way.
Damo, when we had Damo on right after the draft, he had he's like, everybody's talking about, the Jalen Hunt pick. A lot hinges on Nolan Smith for that pick because Nolan didn't give you anything, and he was a first-round pick.
This is how little Nolan did last year. So I did like a tweet, and I listed like the Eagles' first-round picks at their last first-round pick at every position. And I caught it right away after I sent it. Oh, yeah, I forgot Nolan Smith was picked in the first round. Yeah. That's just how little he did last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have given up on him too quickly, though. If he can and remember, he had that shoulder problem, so he got that fixed, hopefully. Procedure in the offseason. He's one of those guys who had to get in an NFL weight program, strength program. So he should be better year 2. If you have him with Hop, Sweat, and BG, I think you're fine. And then you can kind of wait for Jalen Hunt to develop and give him the so-called redshirt year. And then you got a bunch of other guys.
And what about that Julian Okwara? Paul Mancini brings him up in the chat. I forgot about him. They picked him up right after the season.
Yeah, he's one of the futures guys. How he made a big deal about them because it was a weak undrafted year. Weak year in the draft late because of the transfer portal, NIL.
And that signing did go. I don't even think the Eagles technically announced their future signings this year, did they, John? I don't remember him doing it.
No, they did. Yeah, they did.
It was,
Did
a
they?
little
I
under
just
it was
didn't
under
think
the radar for sure.
Yeah. Well, nobody cares about future signing, but they did give him some money. So, relatively speaking, not a lot, but an indication that they like him somewhat. His former third round pick, I think. They also
third round pick.
signed Terrell Lewis, who's a former third round pick, as an edge rusher. Same
And we always
thing.
forget you can put Milton on the outside too if you need to.
Yeah, but that's that's more of like a 5 technique.
Yeah, which
more
he's
of
not going to do much.
more of an old school 3-4 defensive end. God forbid, I just said 3-4.
Yeah, 3-4. Come on, John, it's not 3-4 anymore.
No, well, everybody thinks it is. We're going to talk about that though. Hopefully, we're going to educate some people on how the Eagles play defense. But I think Nolan Smith is a big part of the edge rotation, and if he's not, they're probably going to have some issues.
By the way, you know what the best question was that you guys did with Vic Fangio on Thursday? Will the
linebackers?
Yeah. Well, besides the linebackers, are the edge rushers going to drop back in coverage?
Yeah.
Of course they are. Vic should have been like, they're all dropping back.
By the way, Vic's great. I love Vic because he finally confirmed what I've been saying, and people have been shitting on it for years. Yeah, he would have been the defensive coordinator if the timing worked out. The timing didn't work out, so Vic confirmed that. He also confirmed he was a consultant helping the offense, which
we
for some reason, well, did we? We knew, but a lot of the fans refused to believe that. And he confirmed that. So I was happy that because Vic tells the truth. He does not care about not telling the truth.
That's why
I love that about Vic. That's
why I think fans are going to like him. Hey, John, what was the saying you said about bringing Covey? He's too honest for him?
Yes. Maybe. I don't get this. Like, Britton Covey, I get why, because he's listed as 5'8" and 172, and that's generous. I don't know what Britton really is, but
he's my height. He's 5'6".
He, famously as a rookie, went to park at Lincoln Financial Field, and the parking attendant didn't believe he was an Eagles player.
Yeah, that was tough.
Yeah, so I get why people don't believe in him. He was the best punt returner of football last year.
And he should be the punt returner next year.
Yeah,
I think he will be. I think people are writing him off.
I think he will be too.
I think they'll bring him back as the punt
by
returner.
the way, here's a little tidbit for you. The quarterback likes him.
Yeah, the quarterback likes him. And by the way, Jeff knows this. This guy approaches special teams like he's Peyton Manning. He's got notebooks. He predicted big returns last year because of what he saw on film from the opposition punter and punt return units. And he would occasionally make us aware that we're going to have an opportunity, down the right sideline or something like. And sure enough, there he'd bang one for 30, 35 yards.
He had the 50-yarder against the Giants, and he said that he wasn't surprised that based on the film he watched.
Every time I think of Britton Covey, I think of our friend Derek Gunn, who calls him Crash Test Covey, because every time he runs out there,
a lot of people
pinball, he's getting crushed.
Yeah, and he did, and you worry for his safety. He kind of figured that out in year 2. Most punt returners are good if they are good at it because it comes natural to them. They don't have his attention to detail. So I think people thinking the Eagles can get better at punt returner with Anaya Smith or even Cooper DeJean. And Cooper's really good at it, but Cooper's not going to do it because he's going to be playing on defense.
Yeah,
so
Cooper,
they're not going to
I don't think they're going to put him in harm's way.
Anaya Smith might give him a run, but I think that job should be Covey's and Covey's only, just based on last year.
Man, he was good last year.
Yeah.
Now he'll never be the guy because of his size that has a job, but if it's a legit competition, nobody's going to be close to him.
But by the way, John, the whole Burton Covey, them not believing he was an NFL player at the link thing, that's probably the third on the list of 3 stories that I've been a part of over the last 20 years of Philly athletes. I was in a Xfinity Live one time after the Sixers game. This is during the process era. And TJ McConnell was on the Sixers.
TJ.
Yeah,
But
so
he's playing
Great
well.
player right now, playing great.
yeah, so I'm standing
Yeah.
behind him, and I know it's him. And I'm talking to him. We're talking about the game. You know, we're getting a drink, and he told me, buy me a drink. Okay. He goes to the bar. They don't believe he's a Sixers player. They're like, there's no way, like, this guy's a Sixers player.
That doesn't
Yeah,
surprise
he looks like a
me
suburban
either.
white
Yeah.
guy. It's like, you're not a Sixers player.
Yeah, no one even knew who he was. It was like me and my buddy and TJ McConnell. And yeah, this is like 2016. And we're just laughing. We're like, okay, this team sucks. That's probably why they don't believe him. And then this is about, I want to say about 2008. Yeah, it was 2008. It was after a spring training game for the Phillies. They played the On Deck series, and you go to, and so we go to Chickies and Pete's after the game. Ryan Howard's there with his fiance at the time. And, you know, we say hi to Ryan Howard and, you know, tell him, you know, wish him good luck on the season, stuff like that. To me and my
Former
dad.
Eagles cheerleader, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, so we're talking about that. And there's like 4 tables near us. They have no idea who he is. And we're like, that's Ryan Howard. They're like, who? Like, he only won MVP 2 years ago. He's first base for the Phillies. He hits like 40 home runs a year. Oh, yeah, this is before the bandwagons jumped in. So I'm like, how do you not know who Ryan Howard is if you're like a Phillies sports fan? But
yeah, well, takes everybody. But what were we talking about? I lost my train of
Britton
thought.
Covey.
Oh, Britton.
Deep in the
Yeah, we're going deep in the weeds. But yeah, from Anias, you know, I focus more on third receiver. You don't need a punt returner.
What about
I
kick
don't know.
returner though? Like everybody's talking about the kick returner. Who's going to be the kick returner for the Eagles? They have
Well,
like so
that
many
I think is
options.
a
yeah. Now
legitimate
that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it depends. I don't know how much change there's going to be from the new rules perspective because they watered it down too much.
Yeah.
So I
It's
still
not
think
exactly like the XFL, right?
Yeah, I
It's
think
yeah.
I still think people are going to kick it out of the end zone and figure out that the 30 is better.
By the way, I was beyond furious when I saw an article. This is the most radical change since the 2-point conversion. I'm like, give me a break. It's not.
It would have been.
Yeah, it would have been.
If they brought it out to the 40.
Like they should have.
And yeah, like they should, but they knew they wouldn't pass it. So, you know, they had to water it down to pass the rule. I just don't think it's going to be that much different. I think it's going to be a bunch of people kicking it out of the end zone.
Honestly, the most radical change I've seen since the 2-point conversion was when they changed the extra point and they moved it back to where's John? It's a 30.
Yeah, it's a 33-yard kick.
Yeah, it's a 33-yard kick. And then Mike Tomlin decides, you know what? I'm going crazy. I'm just going to go for 2 all the time. And
I hated that. I hated that change at the time. Now I've gotten used to it, but I didn't like it.
Well, you can't tweet anymore. Eagles up 7-0 because you really don't know.
You gotta wait. You gotta wait. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I didn't like that. It's an over legislated league. I'm on record with that.
I'm trying to remember the kicker for the Saints. That I'm trying to remember when the Saints did that like incredible play at the end of the game. It was in 2003. They did like a bunch of laterals, and so they scored a touchdown. The kicker missed the extra point, and it ended up not going to overtime.
That's big. I don't remember that game. Yeah, I remember the Blair Walsh game. I remember, you know, the Tony Romo game.
Didn't you cover the Blair Walsh game?
No, thank God. That game was in.
That was freezing. It was that.
Yeah, it was outdoors. It was at because they were building the new stadium, and they played the one year at the University of Minnesota outdoors. That was brutal, but that was like a
2015, 2016.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. But the kick was like 23, 24 yards.
Missed it.
and he was never the same.
Remember
Man.
watching the snap to me, and I never want to bring it up to him every time I talk to him, but I got to bring it up at some point. I feel like that messed
Well, to his credit, I mean, he took responsibility because I think it was a bad hold, but he was like, if it were a watermelon, I should have kicked it through.
But
So
you know
he
what's
took
crazy about that?
responsibility.
I thought he was going to score after he botched it. I'm like, oh, he's going to score anyway. And then amazing play.
Yeah, that was a bad kick. But yeah, it's like Ray Finkel for Ace Ventura fans. And nobody saw Ray Finkel. Nobody saw Ace Ventura. The Eagles were in that Super Bowl.
They were in that.
They made up Ace Ventura Super Bowl. It was Eagles Dolphins, I believe. Yes, well, obviously Dolphins. Yeah, it was Eagles Dolphins.
And the only Super Bowl the Eagles could make at the time. This is pre when they started winning regularly.
Anyway,
Jeff, thanks for joining the show, man. You were great as always. I'll end it with let's go wide receiver 3. That's we didn't talk any offense. We were in the weeds on defense. We were in the weeds on special teams. What do you think of wide receiver 3? I know John mentioned maybe Anais Smith there. It's been a tough stretch there with Zach Pascal and Quez Watkins and Julio Jones and Olamide Zaccheaus. What do you think of wide receiver 3?
I'm still not going to sleep on Paris Campbell. I think if Paris Campbell's healthy, he's got a shot. I do like Anais Smith there. I think Britton Covey's going to have a shot there.
Paris Campbell hasn't done much in the NFL.
No, he has not.
I mean, he has not done a lot.
No. Remember, the Eagles liked him, too.
No, they loved him. Well, the personnel did. Jeffrey did not. Jeffrey loved J.J. Arcega-Whiteside.
Yeah, he's got some familiarity with Nick, though, Paris Campbell.
Yeah, who cares? He should. I mean, the guy's done nothing. We talk about Devin White is a star compared to Paris Campbell.
Oh, he is. Yeah. Well, yeah. Devin White's done something in the NFL. Paris.
Paris Campbell. He somehow he ran a 4.31 coming out. So he's got this tremendous speed coming out of college at Ohio State. And he's done nothing to show it at the NFL level. I think he averaged 5.3 yards per catch last year. Now, granted, which is almost impossible, even for a slot receiver at the NFL level. Now, granted, I guess for all the Saquon Barkley apologists, including Jeff, Penn State guy, I guess you could blame it on the supporting cast because nobody blames anything on the individual players with the Giants. It's always the supporting cast. Where does it begin? Where does it end?
You know, it's funny with the Giants. My colleague Cody Benjamin came up with his quarterback rankings this past week, and he got roasted for 2 things. Brock Purdy at 2 and Daniel Jones at 32.
Well, he should have got roasted for both of those things.
Yeah, he did. He did. And I said to him, Cody, I'm not a Daniel Jones fan either, but 32?
32. Now, come on. Daniel Jones actually proved his worth last year when he got hurt.
He won a playoff game.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, because Shody hates Daniel Jones as well. He's a mediocre quarterback, but he's a legitimate NFL starting quarterback.
I will say this about Daniel Jones. I think wherever Daniel Jones goes, I think he will have more than a fair shot to start for that next team he's on.
Yeah, he's mediocre.
He's the definition of mid, as the kids say.
If the Giants want to extend Daniel Jones again, I'm an Eagles fan.
I'm all for it
all day long.
No, I mean, there's only 5 guys that you can really put above everybody else. And
it's the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. 2 were playing opening night, by the way.
And he's not in that group to say the least, but I'm just saying you learned how good he was by watching Tommy DeVito play. I mean,
I still remember John on Christmas Day when Tommy DeVito John had the closest Bob Barker impersonation I've ever. This guy sucks.
He's so bad.
He was terrible.
You saw Tyrod Taylor come back and lift that team against the Eagles.
They almost won that game.
Yeah. Well, they won that game. They
Well, no, in week 16,
Oh
they
yeah,
almost won that
they
game.
almost but yeah, the Daniel Jones is not terrible. He is not. He is certainly not 32nd. And Brock Purdy, look, wonderful year. I mean, by
Yeah,
second,
pump the
I
brakes on Brock
assume,
Purdy a bit.
and I did not see Cody's rankings. I assume Patrick Mahomes is number one.
Patrick Mahomes is number one. Yes.
Well, then you got to start with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson at least.
I think Lamar was 6.
That's a little low for Lamar.
Yeah, that's I said. 2-time MVP, youngest 2-time MVP ever.
Yeah, and I'm not even getting into the young guys and the A-Bears and the
A-Bear? You mean Herbert?
Herbert, yeah. What? I'm Bobby Haber.
Yeah, you're on the Bobby Haber days.
I'm having a stroke on air with Crip and Haber. Bob. I'm conflating Eagles tryout wide receivers and New Orleans Saints quarterback. I've been on Bobby Haber's show. He's got a show down there, by the way.
Yeah, he's pretty popular down there.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. I'm trying to. Well, Vic Fangio was coach. He wasn't Bobby Haber's coach, but he was a coach when Bobby Haber was there.
But no, there's so many good quarterbacks. I mean, come on, Jesus.
But by the way, isn't it kind of upsetting? Vic Fangio basically produced 2 Hall of Famers and Ricky Jackson and Sam Mills, and he doesn't have a stinking linebacker here.
Different era.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the Eagles are convincing themselves they're sold on their linebackers. I think maybe the front office is. I do not think Vic Fangio is for 1 minute convincing himself that his linebackers are competent.
By the way, I want to make it clear. I think the Eagles are correct to devalue the position. I don't
know, John. Are they though?
They extremely devalue the position.
I think they've taken it too far. I agree. I still agree with the general consensus.
Why don't they zig when everybody zags when it comes to linebacker?
I said that earlier when Howie made that comment about the running back. I mean, when Dre Greenlaw got hurt in the Super Bowl, that changed the game.
Orrin Burks came in.
Yeah, Orrin Burks came in. Maybe that's the Eagles. So, he was half decent against Travis Kelce.
Who's the best linebacker in football? Is Fred Warner, in my opinion.
By far.
You guys may think differently.
Roquan Smith's up there too.
He's up there, but you can pick Roquan. But their value is not equal to Myles Garrett, whoever you want to say the best cornerback is, even the best safety. I agree with the devaluing of the position. I just think they've taken it too far.
I still remember back in when they let Trotter, when they rescinded the tag and let Trotter go. I still remember it. Back 2002. You're watching Barry Gardner in camp.
Different era.
This guy ain't it. And then they signed LaVon Kirkland. He wasn't it. Then the next year you go Mark Simino and Nate Wayne. I'm like, they ain't it either. Like,
there's a crap load of good linebackers back then. I'm saying today, as we speak today,
there aren't any.
Everybody's looking for coverage players. Ultimately, and we're going to talk about this later about what Vic is going to do. I think you're going to see a whole crap load of big nickel, 3 safeties on the field, and you're going to see a safety essentially playing linebacker.
I think it might be Sidney Brown.
It could be Sidney if he comes back. It could be Cooper. I think you're going to see a whole lot of it.
Reed could do it too.
Reed's going to be back playing safety though. Reed's going to be on the field, but he's going to be playing safety. And I think it's Sidney's in the conversation, Cooper's in the conversation. And that's how I think they're going to handle the linebacker. I think there's only going to be one linebacker on the field. Unfortunately, that might be Devin White, but there's only going to be one linebacker on the field.
Have we just given up on the Kobe Dean?
I haven't.
I haven't either. He's hurt all the time. That's my only issue.
He doesn't pass the eye test. I'll tell you that. I mean, I don't profess to know how great, how good linebackers are.
My biggest problem with Nakobe is he can't find cleats. I mean, if you're a 23-year-old kid and you can't find cleats that are comfortable for you, something's going on. It's not like somebody my age who needs orthopedics. I mean, something's going on.
What do you mean, son? I've never heard that. He can't find cleats?
No, he had a cleats that were discontinued at Georgia, and he liked them, and for whatever reason now he can't get comfortable.
I've given some NFL players my advice on cleats, and they kind of laughed. I said, "Well, I don't use the metal cleats." Well, what do you mean? I'm like, I did not use metal cleats when I played football. I didn't. I used the rubber ones and didn't care. Grass, turf. It was one less thing I had to worry about before.
Jeff Kerr, standing at 5'6", what position did you play in football?
Would you believe if I told you defensive end and linebacker?
I would not.
If
I was a lot bigger back then.
Jeff has lower body explosion. He's like Saquon.
I was fast. Let's put it that way. My coach decided to say, you know what, you're faster than the other linemen.
He's doing a lot of squats. You're going to see
Kobe Bean back in his day.
I can't squat with Jalen and Saquon. I can squat back in the day.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate you joining in, as always, giving us your insights, sticking with us for almost a full hour. So, Jeff, thanks for joining in, man. We appreciate it.
Yep, you got it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, bud.
There's Jeff Kerr. We'll get to a commercial timeout. We'll come back. And Johnny Mack, we'll talk defense. This is a defensive show today. We're talking a lot of defense. We talked a lot of defense with Jeff Kerr. But I want to explain. I want to get into this Vic Fangio defense. Let's give the listeners a little bit of a lesson today from Johnny Mack on how the defense works, the versatility, why it's not a 4-3 or a 3-4. A lot of versatility in the defense. So we'll come back and we'll talk about that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in on the show, Twiz and Daz, James, and anybody I missed in the chat box. We appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you drop us a like. Stay tuned. We'll be right back on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Is the best vacation one that you find, or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights, or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm, or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Go passionately. Go fearlessly. Go confidently.
Go Birds!
Go confidently towards your goals with First Trust, Philly's hometown bank for nearly 90 years, and the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. We're focused on getting you over the goal line. So go with conviction. Go with trust.
Go Birds!
And go forward with us by your side. First Trust Bank, the official bank of Philadelphia dreams. Oh, and go Birds.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money. We'll haul you into federal court and you might even go to jail. Hey, it's our job.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. Our experts will fight for you using IRS guidelines to stop any IRS actions like bank levies or wage garnishments. Plus, eliminate penalties and interest and reduce your past tax bill so you pay the IRS less. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
I'd have my mom call the number on the screen. You come see me alone. We'll work it out.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365, preparing for just 1 week away from Eagles OTAs, 2 days away from the schedule release. So we'll be able to see when and where the Eagles are playing all their opponents. But Johnny Mack and I have been waiting to talk defense. We're going to get into the Vic Fangio defense, the versatility, why it's not a 3-4, as Johnny Mack likes to say. John, let's start with linebackers, though. The traditional linebackers in football are Sam, Mike, and Will. What's the role of the linebackers in this defense? I know it's obviously changing depending on the situation, but just roughly, what's the role of the linebackers in this defense?
Well, you have all ball linebackers, which are the Mike and the Will. And then you have an edge rusher in this particular defense, which would be the Sam. You know, it's ironically, so, you know, people get caught up in the labels. 3-4 is just personnel, obviously. 3 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, which if you use your head, when, you know, point to me, when did the Eagles have 4 linebackers on the field in 2023, 2024 football? They don't. They never have it on.
No, their linebackers aren't good enough, even if they wanted to do that.
So, you know, basically what people are doing is they're labeling personnel, and even that's incorrect from the standpoint of who's out on the field. So, with the linebackers, you know, Nakobe is penciled in to be the Mike linebacker. Devin White is penciled in to be the Will. And then interestingly, the Sam linebacker would typically be, that would have been Hassan Reddick's role on the line of scrimmage. And the Eagles listed him as a linebacker. It will now be Bryce Huff's role. To give you an example of labeling means nothing, if you go on their website, they'll list Bryce Huff as a defensive end. So it doesn't matter.
But for the benefit of clarity, the Mike linebacker is a middle linebacker.
Yes.
Kobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter. The Will linebacker is your weak side linebacker, and that would be Devin White, for example.
Yes. Yes.
And then the Sam is the strong side linebacker. And in this system, it's technically your edge rusher. It's Bryce Huff, Hassan Reddick, right? So that's the clarity of breaking down the Sam and the Mike. And
and you know, strong side versus weak side. Right. Usually you flip depending on the formation, and that's the difference. And Devin White has versatility. He's played Mike before, but right now, if you're projecting where the Eagles are going to go, at least to start, Nakobe's going to get one more chance to lean that down. Now, you know, Vic brought up Zach Bond. So if Nakobe Dean doesn't play well, they could move Devin White to middle linebacker and play Zach Bond if he thinks Zach Bond can play weak side linebacker. Jeremiah Trotter, I've been told, will start off in the middle as well. So they believe he's a legitimate middle linebacker.
Yeah, he looks like that to me. Now, like I said, I don't profess to know everything.
You don't look like his dad.
No,
you know,
but I'm saying
this
he
is
has
old
the build
school.
of a you know, just when you look at him play, he's not a fast edge rusher like Hassan Reddick. He's
no.
a linebacker.
He's not. Yeah. He's not going near. It's either middle or weak side for him. They're completely different positions, and the best way to understand this, even though they're all linebackers, the off-ball linebackers, the stack linebackers, the guys who play off the line of scrimmage, all meet together with Bobby King, who's the new linebackers coach. The edge rushers, so no matter what the term you want to use for them and what they're listed on the website, they all meet with Jeremiah Washburn. He's the edge rushing coach, essentially. So they don't even meet with the same position coaches. That's how different those particular positions are, even though the Sam linebacker is called a linebacker. He meets with the edge rushers. And a better indication of that would be Hassan Reddick, who just left, worked with Jeremiah Washburn. And guys like Patrick Johnson or Nolan Smith, who are listed as linebackers, they meet with Jeremiah Washburn. Now, to further conflate things, sometimes there's injuries. And there are certain guys more equipped to play off-ball linebacker, like Patrick Johnson was forced to do at certain times last year due to injury, like Nolan Smith did at certain times due to injury. But that's not, sometimes that's like Avonte Maddox moving from cornerback to safety as a rookie. Eagles didn't want to do it. They just had so many injuries, they had to do it. So, once you get down to 53, you do need some versatility. And there's some guys who are, and it's generally the lighter guys that can move back and forth between the two positions. But for our purposes, look, the Eagles have multiple fronts, 50 fronts, which are 5-man fronts, odd man fronts, 40 fronts, which is the typical Jim Schwartz 4-man rush.
Right.
And they will toggle back and forth. Generally, when it's 1st and 10, the Eagles will run what is called a tight front, a TITE, not TIGHT, a tight front, where you have a nose tackle, Jordan Davis. You have 2 defensive ends or interior defensive linebackers, defensive linemen, who play 4-eye technique, which is inside shade and the 4 gap. And that would be Jalen Carter and Milton Williams. And then you have the weak side edge rusher, who's Josh Sweat, a strong side edge rusher, which would be Bryce Huff. And then the middle linebacker and the weak side linebacker. That is generally what the Eagles will play and have been playing. It will not change under Vic Fangio because they've been playing Vic Fangio's system for 3 years. Occasionally, it will turn into a tough front, which is TUFF. And that just means the backside A gap is Jordan Davis's role. So it's just a little bit of a tweak in Jordan Davis's responsibility. Those are their 2 sort of base 1st and 10 looks. From there, depends what happens. If it's 2nd and 10, they might keep that group out there. Or if they want to rush the passer and they're pretty confident that because it's 2nd and 10, they're going to send out their 40 front, where all of a sudden Jalen Carter turns into a 3 technique. Huff and Sweat are going to be back on the field. And then depending on whether it's Jordan Davis, he'll play a shade technique, or if they want more of a pass rush, it'll be Milton Williams, who will play dual 3 techniques with Jalen Carter. You could have Brandon Graham in there. There's a host of different ways you can go. So it toggles. And 3rd and long, 3rd and long, you're going to have that 4-man group, your best pass rushers on the field. And then the secondary, that's where you're going to see the change. You're going to see a nickel back. You might see a big nickel with 3 safeties, whether it's, excuse me, Cooper DeJean or Sidney Brown. So it's a very, and Vic said, it's a very versatile defense. It's designed to adjust and morph. And that's why if you call it a 3-4, first of all, it's technically incorrect. It's any way you want to look at it, it's incorrect because they don't play 4 linebackers ever in 2024. It's not a 4-3 either. So whether you want to call it a 5-2 to start, whether you want to call it a 4-2-1 when they have the nickel in there, whatever you want to call it, it's just a label anyway. I wouldn't get caught up in it. But that's the way the Eagles play defense under Vic Fangio. And it's been the way they play defense under Jonathan Gannon and Sean Desai.
I think the confusion comes where linebackers are being called linebackers, but they're rushing the passer on the edge.
Yeah.
And that's where I think people are maybe, not guys like you, but guys like me, guys that are, not football savants when they hear defenses and they're trying to learn everything and they're trying to hear the breakdowns. Hassan Reddick to me was not a linebacker. He was an edge rusher. Go
He
get
wasn't.
the quarterback. Yeah,
he wasn't.
But and I'm saying in the packages though, in the how they're presented, he's technically a linebacker.
Yeah, I get it. And that's why I said don't get caught up in labels. I mean, and the NFL is part of the problem because if the Eagles listed Hassan Reddick as a linebacker.
Yeah.
Now they list Bryce Huff as a defensive end. You know why? Because Hassan Reddick came into the league as a linebacker and Bryce Huff came into the league as a defensive end. So it never changes, no matter what they play. In the case of Hassan Reddick, it changed. Now you got a guy playing the exact same position who can go on the Eagles website today. Bryce Huff is replacing Hassan Reddick. They list him as a defensive end. Doesn't matter. If people want to get caught up in that, you're not going to understand the whole philosophy.
Right.
The label of the position and the description, that's why I say even offensively, people are more familiar with the terms 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, even 10 personnel, even 21. References how many receivers are on the field, how many tight ends, how many running backs at times. You could play a 12, which is 2 tight ends, but you have a complete flex tight end who's doing the same role as a slot receiver, but it's described as a different personnel grouping.
Yeah.
Because one guy's labeled a tight end and one guy's labeled a receiver. Well, that tight end may never block in his life, and he's just a bigger slot receiver.
Right.
He's playing the same role.
I think the thing that and Shonoff points this out in the chat. There's a lot of contracts that are based on labels.
Yeah,
and
that's part of the
that's why Mike is mad, right? Because now they want to pay him like a linebacker, and he's really an edge rusher.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. And players have to fight that fight, and the NFLPA has to fight that fight, and that's why certain teams will do what they do from a contract standpoint. Wide receivers make more than tight ends. So a couple years ago, there were certain tight ends trying to push for the fact that they were playing more receiver. Kyle Pitts would try to, he's more of a receiver. Defensive ends, outside linebackers. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't affect the NFL is so backward when it comes to franchise tags. For instance, they don't differentiate between edge rushers and all-ball linebackers. So the edge rushers get paid. The all-ball linebackers generally don't, but they all get mixed in together if they're labeled a linebacker. So from a contract standpoint, that's a fight the NFLPA should try to get better defined. From Vic Fangio's standpoint, he doesn't give a shit about that. It's about who's playing where and what their role is. And the Eagles' roles are clearly defined. Now, there's a lot of people who think they're playing a different defense, a different defensive scheme. I don't know why. I got it during Jonathan Gannon's first year. They were still playing big scheme, but they didn't have Jordan Davis and they didn't have Hassan Reddick. So they didn't play the 5 front, the 50 front as much as they typically would have. They didn't have those players. So
why do people then, John, and you obviously might know the answer to this better than I would. Why do people say then Vic Fangio is going to run a 3-4 defense? If we're not changing, where did it come from? It came from somewhere.
Laziness? I don't know. Again, point to me the 4 linebackers. At any point, even if you want to be technical about it, like I used to have these arguments with Jody. Jody used to like to win arguments on technicalities. Now with Hassan Reddick, you had 1, if you want to call him a linebacker, which he's not. But even if you're trying to win the argument on a technical standpoint, you still only get the 3 linebackers because they listed Josh Sweat as a defensive end.
So in a 50 front, could a 50 front technically be looked at as
an odd man front? Yeah.
But I'm saying it's 3-4 because the two other linebackers are the edge rushers on the outside. Maybe it's Bryce Huff and Josh Sweat.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
your two linebackers are
There's no real difference between an old school 3-4 that, say, the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the day, other than, their linebackers basically. What Vic did to tweak it is he calls a gap and a half. So typically in the old school 3-4, you would have the base ends play 5 techniques. So they were outside, essentially the shoulder of the right tackle, left tackle. They're inside more in Vic's tweak of the look. And you had the 2 outside linebackers who would rush the passer along with the traditional stack linebackers. So that's where it comes from. But even that is not, he changed it, and he changed it. What he's trying to do, and Ben Solak is the best one. So steal from Ben. It's all about one guy. It's all about it's sort of like the quarterback in the running game. We always talk about the +1. It's all about the getting +1 in coverage, getting the extra guy in coverage.
Right.
And that's what Big Scheme is about. And he's tweaked it to play. So everybody has gap and a half, not the old school 3-4 would be 2 gaps. He calls his gap and a half. You have a primary responsibility and a second responsibility. And the whole goal is to make sure you don't need a safety to come back, to come down in the box for run support, because you should be able to handle it. Everybody's got their gap responsibility. You should be able to handle it if you execute it in Vic's defense. That's the only difference. But it's an odd man front. It is not an old school 3-4. It is variable. It will morph from, again, that 5-man front to a 4-man front. And if you're playing well defensively, you're going to have many more snaps with 4-man fronts than 5-man fronts, because you're going to force the other team to throw the football.
Right.
And you're going to be in the more traditional pass rushing look without the big nose tackle in there.
Is this fair to say? Show enough points out more than likely our base will be big nickel.
No, it probably won't be big. Big nickel means 3 safeties.
3 safeties, right?
That will not be their base defense. Their base defense will be that 5-man. And by base, I mean, again, what's your definition? My definition of base is what you play on 1st and 10.
Right. I think that's my definition. I don't know what everybody else.
Other people say, what do you play most? What do you play most is nickel in the modern NFL. The Eagles will be in that tight front or that tough front on 1st and 10 more often than not. Now, if Jordan Davis gets hurt, that might change. But as long as Jordan Davis is there, they'll be in that look more than anything else. And if in that look, you'll either have the 2 linebackers out there, which projected to be Nakobe and Devin, at least today, 2 corners and 2 safeties. Now, if somebody comes out in 11, and most teams do, and they're legitimate receivers, you're probably going to have your nickel back on the field. So it's still nickel more than 2 linebackers. And then when you start talking about big nickel, I think my assumption of the Eagles are going to play more big nickel is about their weakness at linebacker.
Right.
I don't think you
have more talent at safety, get them on the field versus weak linebacker.
Yeah. I don't think he'll go into it saying, I want to play big nickel. I think he'll go into it saying, this is my better player.
Right. I want to get this. I want to get this guy on the field, which means I have to run this package.
Exactly.
So what if you're in big nickel and you say you have 3 safeties on the field? What exactly does that mean? Where are the three safeties playing?
Well, one safety is essentially playing linebacker. So again, it's
Right.
label. It's labeling. Like Sidney Brown's going to be playing linebacker. Like Malcolm Jenkins used to be a big nickel player for the Eagles and would move down and essentially play linebacker. You're just having a safety playing the linebacker role. And you can get away with it a lot more in the modern game because people do not take advantage of it and say, all right, Sidney Brown's going to be on the field. We're going to try to run the football. Some teams might occasionally, and if they do that, you'll probably get out of it quickly. But most teams are not disciplined enough to do it. And you try to take advantage of that. Obviously a chess game, but I think because of the Eagles' weakness in linebacker, I think you're going to see more big nickel this year.
Which makes it harder for the opposing team to throw the football effectively, correct?
In theory.
In theory. Duh,
Yeah.
That's all. It's all in theory.
Yeah.
So if Sidney Brown is playing, if we're in big nickel and Sidney Brown's on the field and he's technically speaking, I guess you could say, playing linebacker, he's obviously not rushing the passer. He's covering,
playing
he's in
off
coverage,
ball,
right?
Yeah,
off ball linebacker in coverage.
Yeah. And Vic will drop flat defenders, which people get upset about. So that's edge rushers dropping to cover the flats.
Can you give the scenario for that, please? What's the scenario in the game where edge rushers dropping into coverage? When would the Eagles do it? And B, when does it make sense to do it?
That's dropping an edge rusher is simply a curveball. You're trying to confuse the quarterback. You're trying to, it's not a designed, I want to get this guy in coverage.
Right.
You're trying to give the quarterback a different look. You're trying to confuse him, trying to fool him. He doesn't expect him to drop, and all of a sudden he drops and somebody else comes. Dom Capers would call it a zone blitz. It's not a designed, I think people misunderstand that with Hassan Reddick. And when Sean Desai did it, and Jonathan did it, and Matt Patricia did it, they're not doing it because they think, hey, he's good in coverage.
Yeah,
they're doing it to confuse the quarterback. It's a curveball, basically. And that's a feel of the coordinator.
Get McMullen a whiteboard. Johnny Mac, we're in the weeds. I love it. Get McMullen a whiteboard. Shout out to Ross and Found.
That's just trying to, again, throw that curveball. I would have this argument with Elliot Shore Parks all the time. And he's like, you can't drop Hassan Reddick. I'm like, does Nolan Ryan throw 100% fastballs? No.
Right.
You have the best fastball in the world. If you keep throwing them, the best hitters are just going to gauge you up, and you got to throw other stuff. And that's what a defensive coordinator does with stuff like that.
Confusing defense. I mean, if you're not.
Oh, well, that's part of the issue as well.
And this is where we talked about it with some of these young guys. I mean, having veterans on this defense is going to help.
Well, and we haven't even gotten to the coverage. The coverage is designed to always have split safeties pre-snap. So the quarterback is looking pre-snap at two high safeties. And then post-snap, you spin off into the coverage called. And
so wait, real quick, before you elaborate on this, can the coverage on the back end be completely independent? I guess it wouldn't, no way. But for the sake of the question, could it be independent of what front you're running on the front end of the defense?
No, if it is, you're cover and rush and cover, as JG would always say. Everything is designed to be on the same page. Now,
so a certain front, a tight front or a tough front, as you explained earlier, would mean they would do something specifically on the back end. They couldn't do a variation of things.
Well, no, I mean, they can run any coverage they want off a tight front or a 4-man front when they change. I mean, their coverage, but everybody's aware of who's on the field, or everybody should be aware. So, you know, the majority of Vic's coverages are going to be zone. It's going to be quarters. It's going to be the main cover 4. You're going to see cover 6. You're going to be cover 8. There's going to be mix and match zones. So match zones where essentially it looks like man coverage, but it's really not. And this is the problem with Vic's defense. There is a lot of opportunities for blown coverages for lack of communication on the back end.
Theodore Nicholas, this is a great point. Communication will be the deciding factor.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Now, if you guys are on the same page, as you've seen some of his Chicago defenses, San Francisco, even Denver, it could be pretty special. But you can also see blown coverage. You even saw it in the Super Bowl with Andy won 2 Super Bowls with the same play, confusing the defense.
And he burned us with it twice in the same 2 back-to-back drives, I think it was.
And that's just guys blowing coverages and not communicating. So it's not easy. But the whole point of the coverage scheme is to have those 2 make everything look the same pre-snap. So the quarterback has to digest quickly post-snap what coverage it is. And that, in theory, the theory is that slight hesitation makes it easier for the defense to succeed. I like the fact that Vic essentially said, when he was asked about some of the most important elements of his defense, he started with good players. It's like any other
smart players too. You need smart players in this defense.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't matter, but also what I like about Vic is he said, when things go bad, he's not scheming you out of it. You're going to go back to basics. And that might that might be just quarters coverage, bang, 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 over and over again to get people to settle down in the foundational principle. But it can be complicated. And that's one of my biggest concerns when we talked leading up to the draft. I was like, I don't necessarily like young cornerbacks in this particular defense. There's going to be some learning curve.
Which is where I think advocating for Bradbury might make sense. John, I want to hit this super chat from James. Send us $20. James, we appreciate you. As always, you're a big contributor to JAKIB Sports, and all your contributions are very much appreciated. He says late here, but has Johnny Mac mentioned how Vic, and he meant mishandled, mislabeled, not mishandled. Mislabeled the 3-4 because they count creepers as Sams. I think he means Sams there, and vice versa. But in Vic's world, not creeper. It's a 4-front disguised, and strong edges drop the hook flat to stop high-low.
He plays it well. The flat defenders we talked about, that's when he drops, whether it's going to be Bryce Huff or Josh Sweat or Nolan Smith or whomever is playing the edge, he'll occasionally throw the curveball, and that's that flat defender.
Right.
And, Andrew Van Ginkel did a hell of a job at that in Miami last season, as an example. It remains to be seen if they find a player who excels at that type of role, or if he leans towards, if Huff and Sweat aren't good at it, he might just put it in his back pocket a little bit more often. He might not use it as well. That I really think people got to just forget about 3-4, 4-3. He uses 50 fronts. He uses 40 fronts. He uses them both. They'll start with the 50 front. As it becomes more of an obvious passing situation, it'll be a 40 front. And it toggles back and forth. This whole defense is versatility. His whole philosophy is based on being able to play both, so you can defend the run while keeping that extra player in coverage. Again, it's +1. It's the +1 of defense versus the +1 of offense. the whole system is designed to keep the +1 in coverage because that's what the modern NFL game demands. For those people who say, is there going to be and I've gotten this a lot, is there going to be a safety dropping down? He doesn't want a safety to have to drop down. That's the last thing he wants. He wants two high safeties until you spin off. But as far as people mislabeling, that has to do with the labeling of the players. Again, the Eagles called Hassan Reddick a linebacker because he started and he was drafted as a linebacker mistakenly, I might add, by the Arizona Cardinals. So he's always a linebacker. Bryce Huff is now a defensive end. They're going to play the same damn role. So who cares?
Is it fair to wonder if, and maybe I'm completely wrong. Is it fair to wonder if the overcomplication of the defense is necessary? I mean, is that maybe that's just the NFL? It has to be this complicated.
No, well, more teams. Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Nick Sirianni, Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur. I'm probably leaving a bunch out. The reason Vic's defense became the defense in the NFL is all those offensive guys think it's the most difficult defense to deal with. And when they got head coaching jobs, they essentially wanted defensive coordinators that were going to run his scheme.
What percentage of the NFL is running this defense?
It topped out at 12, I think, 2 years ago. And then a bunch of teams had problems.
Well, because I think the biggest problem with the defense is, one, you need great players, and two, you need smart players.
Yeah.
You need guys. I mean, this is not and especially we just broken it all down in the last 30, 40 minutes, which has been a really great breakdown. I'm learning a lot. I mean, think about the changes play to play, each drive, each play could be a different look. You got to have a full, complete understanding of what your role is. And when.
It's complicated. That's been one of my issues. Well, I have two issues. One is now that people have seen it so much, it becomes easier.
Has it been figured out? Because a lot of people, I do get that comment a lot on the JAKIB chat.
I think certainly it has been figured out in certain places. I mean, Ed Donatel, who's a big guy for years and years and years, really did a poor job, and he lost his job in 1 year. Sean last year, not good. So, if it's not taught correctly and people aren't on the same page, it can look really bad. When it's played at a high level and Vic has been able to do it at the highest level, it can look really good. So
Vic also doesn't have look, Vic Fangio has been around a long time. I'm not going to knock his career, but there are many people who comment this as well. He hasn't won shit. He hasn't won a Super Bowl.
He's never even had a number one defense. I believe
that's where I'm like, and then real quick, let's just look at this defense. We're running out of time here. 9:55. Great defensive breakdown from Johnny Mack. But outside of Darius Slay and James Bradbury, there is a lot of youth on this defense. You lost Fletcher Cox. Your whole defensive line is in the rookie contracts, basically, besides Josh Sweat, and you have Brandon Graham, who's a role player at this point. Your safeties are Reed Blankenship, Sidney Brown, maybe Cooper DeJean. You got Quinn.
That's
a lot of young players, though, Johnny Mack.
Yeah, well, and the Eagles made it, Howie called it a mentality offseason. They made a big deal about getting 5 Red Star players. They have tried to get players that are have high football IQs for that reason.
Yeah, this is where that Red Star thing comes into play,
Yeah, it doesn't matter with the defensive front for the most part, as long as they're disciplined. But on the back end, and that includes the linebackers. So the back seven, it's really important to get people communicating and get them on the same page in coverage. And yeah, that's going to be a big thing of it. Now, Cooper, very high football IQ. Sidney Brown, very high football IQ. Guys like that, they project well. N'Kobe Dean, tremendously high football IQ. They project well from that standpoint, but you got to do it on the field. And it is just a projection at this point.
There's one more super chat I want to get to from James Carver, who's really a great contributor. James, we do appreciate it very much. Well, a DE isn't really an edge, regardless of alignment. The DE of old Jim Johnson era are not here anymore, but they want that money of a DE. 3-4 is gone because there's no DEs really anymore. Yeah, Johnny Mack and I did talk a lot about that at the beginning of the breakdown of the defense. And for anybody that missed the full, I mean, if you're confused about what Vic Fangio is going to be running, this is the segment for you. I'm going to post out the full segment on the JAKIB YouTube channel.
Yeah, well,
so
depends. Like there's
technique.
I probably said when we got to go. I probably like nose tackle is zero technique, or Jordan Davis can shade technique. And then you go out, as I said, in those tight fronts where they start. They generally play 4-eye. They play 5 technique at times, which is when you start talking old school base ends in the 3-4 would play 5. Maybe they go out to 7 occasionally. The wide 9 is famous in Philadelphia. It's not a defense. It's a technique describing edge rushers way out to try to get that speed rush on the edge. So it's all about technique on the defensive line and what technique, defensive front, I'll even call it, what technique you're playing. And the Eagles will start with 0, 4-eye, and 4-eye in the middle. And then it kind of depends on the feel of the game and the feel of the edge rushers, how wide they're going to get. They're not going out to wide 9 when it's 1st and 10. So all those variable techniques are in the defense and they're built in the defense. But the goal on 1st and 10 is that gap and a half. So you don't need an extra body in the box to stop the run. And the goal when you get to 2nd and long and 3rd long is that +1 in coverage at all times. And you know, it's been that way. This will be the 4th consecutive year they played this defensive scheme. But now they have the guy who created it. So in theory, it'll be taught better and it'll be used better in theory. Although it's tough to going to be as good as they were in 2022.
Not going to take another commercial timeout. We'll just get to the end of the show coming up here in a second. We went long on the defensive breakdown. I want to thank James Carver one more time for his contributions today to the show. And for everybody in the chat, you guys seem to be enjoying this segment. I'm enjoying this segment. So make sure you drop us a like on the show. Let's push that number today. Let's get up over 150. We appreciate everybody in there. John, I'll end it with one question for you. And this is a Johnny Mack opinion. Is this the right defense to be running? I mean, we just talked about it. He's never had a number 1 defense. He's never won the Super Bowl. We got the guy that made the defense, but if the defense isn't the right defense, well, who cares?
Look, I've said it a lot. I think it's happened every defense, whether it's Tony Dungy and really it's Monty Kiffin, cover 2, Pete Carroll, cover 3. Every defense gets copied that's tremendously successful. And the more people play it, the easier it is to digest it. And then you sort of go back in another direction. I think we're at that tipping point and have been for a couple of years with Vicks. Too many people run it. Too many quarterbacks have seen it. That's my personal opinion. That was my personal opinion. And people that watch this show know that it has been for a couple of years. I think it's easier now. Quarterbacks aren't as confused. And I think it should go in a different direction. But look, again, I go back to the reason this is so popular is not Vic Fangio. It's Sean McVay It's Kyle Shanahan. It's Nick Sirianni. It's Matt LaFleur. It's Kevin O'Connell. Those are the guys, the offensive guys who said, boy, this is a pain in the ass to deal with. And I think the tide has turned, but that's just a personal opinion.
And is that the answer as to why the Eagles brought Vic Fangio in to give them, counsel on the offensive side of the football? How to beat this defense?
Well, when he was consultant,
consulting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they love Vic and they have forever. And they've played his scheme since Nick Sirianni has gotten here. And now they have him. So at least they have the original and not the Xerox copy, is how I describe it.
Yeah, so that's a good breakdown. I mean, it's definitely a confusing defense. I mean, I'm sitting here, there's terms and things bouncing all over my head. I'm like, but we'll see how it works out. I think this is a good point. I wanted to bring up one last thing before we get out of here. One second, let me find it. And Vic did say this. You have to have the players. You can't blame Vic as not successful because no Super Bowl. To Vic's credit, he did say that at his opening press conference.
Players play. Yeah. Like he said about Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how we use him. He's going to be good. There's certain guys.
And that's what I liked about it. Mark Farzetta brought that up on our show last week. I like that he's not, hey, my scheme is great. If I can fix everything. He's like, look, this is the NFL. I need great players to win. And I think that's a good mindset to have.
And Jalen Carter to me would be, his best case, Jim Schwartz, if Jim was here, 3 technique, just go. Unfortunately here, he'll play some 3 in obvious passing situations, a lot of 3, but he's going to play a lot of 4-eye. It's probably not the best use of him, but
see that
he's a good player. He's a good player.
That concerns me though, because I think those two are what the defense hinges on. You want to get the most out of those.
Again, that's first and 10. He's playing 4-eye.
Right.
If it's 2nd and 12, he's probably playing 3 technique. So that's how quickly it changes.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk more about that later in the week and what is the best system? What is the best setup for guys like Jordan Davis, guys like Jalen Carter, even guys on the back end like Cooper DeJean and like Quinyon Mitchell. So we'll talk about all that. It's a good episode of Birds 365. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Robert, Underdog, James, Crowley, C24, Niners all damn day, Underdog, anybody I missed, James Carver, C24. Everybody, we appreciate you guys so much in the chat. You guys make Birds 365 a success. So if you could drop us a like, it would be much appreciated if you enjoyed the show today. Johnny Mac, good show today. We'll be back tomorrow. Scheduled release coming up on Wednesday. So a couple things coming, and then OTA start next week. So we're getting closer, Eagles fans. Stay with us all through the offseason. We'll be preparing for the Eagles season just like each and every one of you. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Johnny Mac, thanks for the defensive breakdown to a defensive dummy like me. I appreciate it. Have a good day, sir.
All right. Thanks, Zander.
Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Birds 365, the destination for the passionate Eagles football fan who bleeds green. If it's Eagles football, we're talking about it. Debate, inside the locker room, and guests that are some of the greatest football minds from around the region. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had a blast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on social media at JAKIB Sports. See you next time on Birds 365.